The transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of Alara Prime. Commander Daniel Carter gripped his seat and looked out the small window. Below him stretched a world of purple mountains and silver oceans. Crystal towers rose from the surface like giant needles pointing at the sky. This was the heart of the Valari Empire, the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. Daniel was 34 years old, a soldier who had spent most of his life in space. He had fought pirates near the asteroid belts and protected cargo ships along the outer trade routes. But nothing had prepared him for this mission. Earth had chosen him to be their ambassador to the Valari, and he still did not understand why. The humans were new to space travel. They had only discovered how to move faster than light 200 years ago. In that time, they had built a small fleet of ships and established colonies on a dozen worlds. But compared to the Valari, who had ruled their empire for 10,000 years, humanity was like a child learning to walk. The ship landed on a platform made of white stone that seemed to glow from within. Daniel stepped out and felt the warm air on his face. The sky above was a soft orange color, and 2 moons hung low on the horizon. A group of Valari soldiers waited for him at the end of the platform. They were tall, much taller than any human. Their skin was covered in scales that changed color in the light, shifting from blue to green to purple. Their eyes were golden and seemed to look right through him. Each one carried a weapon that hummed with energy. Daniel walked toward them with his head held high. He had been told that the Valari respected strength and confidence. Showing fear would only make them see him as weak. A Valari male stepped forward. He wore robes of deep red, which marked him as a member of the noble class. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, and his expression showed nothing but contempt. "I am Lord Vexen," he said. His voice was deep and cold. "Chief Advisor to Queen Nathara. You are the human they sent to speak for your kind." "I am Commander Daniel Carter," Daniel replied. "I bring greetings from Earth and hope for friendship between our peoples." Lord Vexen made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Friendship? How amusing. Your species has existed for barely a heartbeat. What could you possibly offer us?" Daniel did not let the insult show on his face. "We offered trade, cooperation, and the chance to learn from each other. Humanity may be young, but we have much to share." "We shall see," Vexen said. He turned and began walking toward the Crystal Palace that dominated the city. "The Queen will receive you tomorrow. Until then, you will stay in the quarters we have prepared. Do not wander. The palace has many dangers for those who do not know its ways." The quarters they gave Daniel were beautiful but cold. The walls were made of the same glowing crystal as everything else on this world. The furniture was carved from a dark wood that smelled like cinnamon. But there was no warmth here, no welcome. He was a stranger in a place that did not want him. For the next several days, Daniel attended formal meetings with various Valari officials. They asked him questions about Earth, about human technology, about their military strength. He answered honestly but carefully, knowing that every word he spoke would be analyzed and judged. The noble houses watched him like predators watching prey. They whispered behind his back and made jokes he could not understand. Some of them refused to speak to him at all, treating him as if he were invisible. But there was one, Valari, who was different. Princess Lorana was the queen's only daughter and the heir to the throne. She was younger than most of the nobles, perhaps the equivalent of 30 in human years, though she had lived for 3 centuries. Her scales were a beautiful shade of silver, and her eyes were not golden like the others, but a soft violet color. Daniel first met her in the palace library. He had gone there to learn more about Valari history, hoping that understanding their past would help him navigate their present. He found her sitting alone among the shelves, reading from a device that projected words into the air. "You are the human," she said when she saw him. It was not a question. "I am," Daniel replied. And you are the princess." Lyrina smiled, and it transformed her face. Unlike the other Valari, who always seemed to be calculating and cold, her smile was genuine. "I have read about your world, Earth, a planet of blue oceans and green forests. It sounds beautiful." "It is," Daniel said, "though I have not seen it in many years. Space has been my home for a long time." "That is something we have in common," Lyrina said. "I was born on a starship, traveling between worlds. I did not set foot on Valara Prime until I was 20 years old. Sometimes I still feel more at home among the stars than here in this palace." They talked for hours that first day. Daniel told her about Earth, about the mountains and rivers, about the cities that glowed at night like fallen stars. Lyrina told him about the Valari, about their long history and their ancient traditions, about the burden of being heir to an empire she had never asked to rule Dot in the weeks that followed. Their meetings became a regular occurrence. Daniel would find excuses to visit the library, and Lyrina would always be there. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. The other Valari noticed, of course. Lord Vexen watched them with suspicious eyes. The noble houses whispered that the princess was spending too much time with the human. But Lyrina did not seem to care what they thought. "They do not understand," she told Daniel one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. "The flowers here glowed in the darkness, filling the air with soft light. They see you as lesser because you are different. But I see strength in difference. I see possibility." Daniel looked at her, at the way the light played across her silver scales, at the gentle curve of her smile. He felt something stir in his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time. "Princess," he said, "I think you may be the only one here who does." Lyrina reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cool and smooth. "Then we will have to show them together." At that moment, standing in a garden of glowing flowers on an alien world, Daniel Carter realized that his mission had become something far more complicated than diplomacy. He was falling in love with a princess, and nothing in the galaxy could stop it. The Valari had a saying that was older than their empire itself. Blood does not mix with water. It meant that the royal bloodline must remain pure, untouched by lesser species. For 10,000 years, this rule had been the foundation of their civilization. To break it was to invite death. Daniel knew this. He knew it every time he walked through the palace halls and felt the eyes of the nobles on his back. He knew it every time Lord Vexen reminded him that humans were guests who could be removed at any moment. He knew it every time he looked at Lyrina and felt his heart beat faster. But knowing something and accepting it are two very different things. 6 months had passed since his arrival on Valara Prime. In that time, Daniel had become something rare among humans, a familiar face in the Valari court. He had learned their customs and their language. He had earned the grudging respect of a few of the younger nobles, who saw value in trade with Earth. But he had never stopped being an outsider. The only place he truly felt welcome was with Lyrina. Their friendship had grown slowly, like a flower pushing through stone. They met in the library, in the gardens, in the quiet corners of the palace where no one thought to look. They talked about philosophy and science, about music and art, about the loneliness that came with being different from everyone around them. And somewhere along the way, friendship became something more. The first time Lyrina kissed him, they were standing on a balcony overlooking the silver ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She had been telling him about a poem she had read, something about stars and distance and the space between hearts. Then she had stopped talking, looked at him with those violet eyes, and pressed her lips to his. Daniel had never kissed an alien before. Her lips were cool and smooth, and she tasted like nothing he could describe. Like starlight, perhaps, or the first breath of morning. When she pulled away, he saw fear in her eyes, but also hope. I should not have done that, she whispered. I am glad you did, he replied. After that night, everything changed. They could not be together openly, so they learned to be together in secret. They developed a code of glances and small touches that meant nothing to anyone watching, but meant everything to them. They stole moments whenever they could, brief meetings that felt like lifetimes. Lieutenant Commander Grace Murphy was the only human who knew the truth. She was Daniel's second in command, a sharp woman with red hair and a temper to match. She had been his friend for 15 years, and she was the only person he trusted completely. Danny, you have lost your mind, she said when he told her. They were alone in his quarters, speaking in whispers, even though no one could hear them. She is a princess. Not just any princess, the heir to the biggest empire in the quadrant. If they find out about this, they will not just kill you. They will use it as an excuse to attack Earth. I know the risks, Daniel said. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you have forgotten everything except how she makes you feel. Grace shook her head. I am not saying your feelings are not real. I can see that they are. But this is bigger than the two of you. This is about humanity's place in the galaxy. Daniel sat down heavily on his bed. What would you have me do? Walk away from her? Yes, Grace said. That is exactly what I would have you do. For Earth, for our people, for your own life. But Daniel could not walk away. He had tried. In the first weeks after that kiss on the balcony, he had avoided Lyrina, made excuses not to meet her, buried himself in diplomatic work. But every night he dreamed of her, and every morning he woke with her name on his lips, and Lyrina would not let him go either. She found him in the training room one evening, practicing combat moves against a holographic opponent. The other humans had already gone to bed, and Daniel was alone, working out his frustration through physical exercise. You have been avoiding me, Lyrina said. Daniel turned off the hologram. Princess, I think it would be better if we do not call me that, she interrupted. Not when we are alone. I am not a princess to you. I am just Lyrina. That is the problem, Daniel said. You are not just anything. You are the heir to an empire. And I am nothing. A soldier from a young species that your people barely tolerate. If anyone discovers what we have done, it will destroy everything. Lyrina stepped closer to him. I have lived for 300 years. In all that time, I have done everything my mother expected of me. I have studied politics and warfare. I have attended ceremonies and met with diplomats. I have smiled when I wanted to scream and stayed silent when I wanted to speak. I have never once done anything for myself. She reached out and took his hand. Until you. You are the first thing I have ever chosen, just because I wanted it. And I will not give you up, because my people are afraid of change. Daniel looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, at the way she stood tall, even when the weight of an empire rested on her shoulders. He had spent his whole life being practical, being careful, being exactly what humanity needed him to be. But in this moment, he could not be anything except what his heart demanded. This will not end well, he said. Nothing worth having ever does, she replied. He kissed her then, pulling her close and holding her as if she might disappear at any moment. Outside the training room, the palace slept, unaware of the forbidden love blooming in its heart. The two moons rose over the silver ocean, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird sang its lonely song. For 2 years, they lived in this stolen world. 2 years of secret meetings and hidden smiles. 2 years of happiness built on a foundation of lies. Grace helped them when she could, covering for Daniel when he disappeared, keeping the other humans from asking too many questions. But secrets have a way of escaping. And lies, no matter how carefully constructed, always fall apart in the end. Lord Vexen had been watching them from the beginning. He had spies everywhere in the palace, servants who reported to him. guards who told him everything they saw. He had noticed the way the princess looked at the human, the way she smiled when he entered a room, the way she found excuses to be near him. At first, he had thought it was only curiosity. The princess had always been different, more interested in other species than was proper for Valari royalty. But as the months passed, Vexen began to suspect something more. He gathered his evidence slowly, carefully, piece by piece. And when he finally had enough, he brought it to the queen. The storm was coming, and Daniel and Lyrina had no idea how close it was. Lyrina knew something was wrong before the medical device finished its scan. She had been feeling strange for weeks now, tired in ways she had never experienced, sick in the mornings, her scales losing their usual shine. At first, she thought it was stress. The burden of hiding her relationship with Daniel, the constant fear of discovery, the weight of living a double life. But deep down, she suspected it was something else. The device made a soft sound, and the results appeared in the air before her. Lyrina read them 3 times, certain she must be making a mistake. But the words did not change. They stayed exactly the same, impossible and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She was carrying a child. Daniel's child. For a long moment she simply stood there in her private chambers, staring at the glowing words. This should not be possible. Valari and humans were completely different species. Their biology was not compatible. Every scientist who had ever studied the matter had agreed on this point. And yet here was the proof that they had all been wrong. Lyrina placed her hand on her stomach. There was no outward sign yet, no visible evidence of the life growing inside her. But she could feel it somehow, a warmth that had not been there before, a presence that was both foreign and familiar. She needed to tell Daniel, but she also needed time to think. For 3 weeks, Lyrina kept the secret to herself. She avoided Daniel as much as she could, making excuses about royal duties and diplomatic meetings. She knew he was confused and hurt by her distance, but she did not know how to explain what was happening. She did not even understand it herself. During those weeks, she did her own research. She accessed the most restricted medical databases in the Empire, looking for any record of something like this happening before. She found nothing. In 10,000 years of Valari history, there had never been a hybrid child. What was growing inside her was the first of its kind. She also thought about what this would mean for her people. The Valari prized purity above all else. Their entire social structure was built on the idea that some bloodlines were better than others. A half-human child as heir to the throne would shake the foundations of everything they believed. Some would see it as an abomination. Others might see it as a sign of change. But all of them would have opinions, and none of those opinions would be quiet. Finally, Lyrina could not keep the secret any longer. She sent a message to Daniel, asking him to meet her in their usual place, a small room behind the library that no one else knew about. When he arrived, she could see the worry on his face. "You have been avoiding me," he said. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Lyrina said. "You did nothing wrong. But something has happened, and I do not know how to tell you." She took a deep breath and reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady. Whatever came next, at least she would not face it alone. "Daniel, I am carrying your child." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. She watched his face change, saw the confusion give way to shock, then to something she could not quite identify. His grip on her hand tightened. "That is not possible," he said finally. "I know, but it is true. I have checked the scans multiple times. There is no mistake." Daniel sat down slowly, as if his legs could no longer support him. "A child. Our child." He looked up at her with eyes full of wonder. "How is this possible?" "I do not know. Perhaps our species are more compatible than anyone believed. Perhaps it is something unique to the two of us. Perhaps it is simply a miracle. Lyrina sat down beside him. But Daniel, we have to face what this means. A hybrid child. The heir to the Valari throne with human blood. My mother and the noble houses will never accept this. We have to tell them, Daniel said. If we tell them, they will try to kill you. And they will want to end the pregnancy. Lyrina's voice broke on the last words. I cannot let that happen. This child is innocent. It did not choose its parents. Neither did we choose to fall in love, Daniel said. But we did. And now we have to deal with the consequences. They talked through the night, trying to find a solution that did not exist. They could run, but there was nowhere in the galaxy that the Valari Empire could not reach. They could hide the truth, but eventually the child would be born, and there would be no hiding it then. They could fight, but two people against an empire was not a battle. It was suicide. In the end, they decided to wait. They would keep the secret as long as possible and hope that time would show them a path forward. It was not a good plan. It was barely a plan at all. But it was all they had. What they did not know was that their secret was already out. Lord Vexen had been thorough in his surveillance of the princess. He had placed recording devices in places she would never think to check, including the medical scanner in her private chambers. When Lyrina ran her scan, Vexen received a copy of the results within minutes. He could barely believe what he was seeing. A human had defiled the royal bloodline. The princess was carrying a half-breed child. It was the greatest scandal in the history of the Empire, and Vexen was the one who had discovered it. For a moment, he considered using this information for his own benefit. He could blackmail the princess, force her to support his political goals, make himself the true power behind the throne. But the risk was too great. If this secret ever came out without his involvement, he would be blamed for not reporting it immediately. No, there was only one thing to do. He had to tell the queen. Queen Nethara was in her private study when Vexen requested an audience. She was an ancient Valari, over 800 years old, with scales that had turned from silver to pure white with age. Her eyes, still sharp and golden, missed nothing. Lord Vexen, she said, it is late for a visit. What brings you here? Your Majesty, I bring news that will disturb you greatly. Vexen bowed low. It concerns the princess. He told her everything. The secret meetings, the forbidden relationship, the impossible pregnancy. He showed her the evidence he had gathered, the recordings and the medical scans and the testimony of his spies. He watched as the queen's expression changed from confusion to understanding to something hard and cold. When he finished, Queen Nethara was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke a single word. Summon them. The guards came for Daniel at midnight. They broke down his door without warning and dragged him from his bed in chains. Grace tried to fight them, but there were too many. She was knocked to the ground and told that if she interfered, she would be killed. At the same time, other guards were escorting Lyrina from her chambers. They were more gentle with her, out of respect for her rank, but the message was clear. She was not a princess anymore. She was a prisoner. They brought them both to the queen's private throne room, where Nethara waited on a seat of carved starstone. Around her stood the heads of every noble house in the empire. Awakened from their sleep, for what they had been told was a historic moment. Lord Vexen stood at the queen's side, his face showing nothing but satisfied victory. Daniel looked at Lyra across the room. She was pale, her scales dull with fear, but she held her head high. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The queen rose from her throne, and the room fell silent. The judgment was about to begin. The throne room was filled with the most powerful beings in the Valari Empire. Noble lords and ladies stood in their finest robes, their scales catching the light from the crystal walls. They had been pulled from their beds in the middle of the night, told only that the queen demanded their presence for a matter of grave importance. Now they watched with hungry eyes as the drama unfolded before them. Daniel stood in chains at the center of the room. His arms were bound behind his back, and 2 guards held him in place, their weapons humming with deadly energy. He had never felt so alone in his life. The entire weight of an alien civilization was pressing down on him, and he had nothing to protect himself except his own courage. Across the room, Lorena stood between 2 female guards. They had not put chains on her, but their message was clear enough. She was no longer free. She was no longer the heir to anything. In the eyes of everyone present, she had already fallen. Queen Nethara descended from her throne, each step slow and deliberate. Her white scales seemed to glow in the soft light. Her golden eyes were fixed on Daniel with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Commander Daniel Carter of Earth," she said. Her voice echoed through the chamber, cold and powerful. "You stand accused of crimes against the Volari Empire. You have touched what is forbidden. You have defiled the royal bloodline. You have created something that should not exist." Daniel met her gaze without flinching. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he would not show fear. "Not here. Not now. I have loved your daughter," he said. "I make no apology for that." A gasp went through the assembled nobles. To speak so boldly to the queen was unheard of. To admit such a crime without shame was madness. Lord Vexen stepped forward, his dark scales gleaming with satisfaction. "Your Majesty, this creature has proven his guilt with his own words. I recommend immediate execution. Let his death serve as a warning to all who would threaten the purity of our people." Many of the nobles nodded in agreement. Daniel could see the bloodlust in their eyes. They wanted to see him die. They wanted to watch the human who had dared to reach above his station be cut down before him. But the queen did not respond to Vexen's suggestion. Instead, she continued walking toward Daniel until she stood directly in front of him. She was tall, much taller than him, and she looked down at him with an expression he could not read. "You love my daughter," she said quietly, so that only he could hear. "Is that truly what you believe?" "It is the truth," Daniel replied. "I love her more than my own life. I would die for her without hesitation. That may be what happens tonight." The queen turned away from him and faced her court. Her voice rose to fill every corner of the room. "For 10,000 years, we have held ourselves apart from the other species of the galaxy. We have called ourselves the chosen people, the superior race, the rulers of the stars. We have looked down on all others as lesser beings, fit only to serve us or fear us." She paused, letting her words sink in. The nobles exchanged confused glances. This was not what they had expected. "And in that time," Nethara continued, "what have we accomplished? Our empire has not grown in 3,000 years. Our population has been declining for centuries. Our artists create nothing new. Our scientists discover nothing important. We've become a civilization that is proud of its past because it has no future." Lord Vexen's smile had disappeared. "Your Majesty, I do not understand the purpose of this speech. The human has confessed his crime. Justice must be served." "Justice," the queen repeated. "Tell me, Lord Vexen, what justice is there in killing a man for the crime of loving someone? What justice is there in punishing 2 people for creating new life?" She turned to face Lorena. Mother and daughter looked at each other across the crowded room. Whatever passed between them was silent, a conversation that only they could understand. "I have watched this human for 3 years," Nethara said. "I have had him followed, studied, analyzed. I wanted to understand why my daughter was drawn to him, what quality he possessed that our own nobles lacked." She walked over to Daniel and placed her hand on his shoulder. The touch was light, but it sent a shock through the entire room. The queen was touching an alien. The queen was treating a human as an equal. "I found courage," she said. He came to our world knowing that we despised his kind, and he never once backed down. I found intelligence. He learned our language and our customs faster than anyone expected. He understood our politics better than some of our own nobles. And I found something else. Something that we, in our pride and isolation, have almost forgotten. Her voice rose to a roar that shook the crystal walls. I found the capacity to love without calculation, to give everything for another person without asking what he would receive in return, to be brave not for glory or power, but simply because his heart demanded it. She released Daniel and turned to face her nobles. Her eyes swept across them like a storm. "Did you know my daughter is expecting, human?" The question hit the room like a thunderbolt. Those who had not known the full truth now understood. The princess was carrying a hybrid child. The heir to the throne would have human blood. "Yes, your majesty," Daniel said, his voice steady. "I am aware. And do you intend to stand by her? To protect this child that your union has created? To face whatever consequences may come?" "With my life." Queen Nethara nodded slowly. The hardness in her face seemed to soften, just slightly, enough for those who knew her to see that something fundamental was changing. "Kneel," she commanded. Daniel dropped to his knees. He expected to feel the cold kiss of a blade on his neck. Instead, he felt the queen draw her ceremonial sword and rest it gently on his shoulder. "By the ancient rights of our empire," she announced, "I declare this man worthy of the royal house of Valara. By his courage, by his honor, and by the love he bears my daughter, I name him Prince Consort Daniel, rightful husband of Princess Lorana, future king of the Valari Empire." The silence that followed was absolute. Every noble in the room stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Lord Vexen found his voice first. "This is madness. You cannot simply change 10,000 years of tradition because your daughter made a mistake. The noble houses will never accept a human on the throne. The people will revolt. The empire will fall. Perhaps," the queen replied calmly, "or perhaps it will finally grow. Perhaps this child, this impossible mixing of two worlds, will be the beginning of something greater than anything we have built alone." She extended her hand to Daniel and helped him rise. He stood beside her, still unable to fully understand what had just happened. One moment he had been facing death. Now he was a prince. Across the room, Lorena was crying. Not from fear or sadness, but from relief. From joy, from the overwhelming emotion of watching her mother choose love over tradition, change over stagnation, the future over the past. "The child my daughter carries will be recognized as legitimate heir to this throne," Nethar declared. "Anyone who threatens this child, anyone who questions its right to rule, will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" One by one, the nobles began to nod. Some did so eagerly, seeing opportunity in the new order. Others did so reluctantly, knowing that to oppose the queen openly would mean their destruction. Only Lord Vexen remained standing straight, his face twisted with rage. "You will regret this," he hissed. "Perhaps," the queen said, "but I have spent 800 years regretting nothing. It is time I took a chance on something worth regretting." She raised Daniel's hand in her own and turned to face the assembled court. "Bow before your future king." The silence in the throne room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Every noble stood frozen, caught between tradition and the undeniable command of their queen. The guards still held their weapons, uncertain of what they were supposed to do now that the prisoner had become a prince. Then Lord Commander Tehran moved. He was the eldest of the Velari warriors, a male who had fought in 100 battles and survived 1,000 years. His scales were scarred from combat, and his eyes had seen empires rise and fall. When he dropped to one knee before Daniel, the sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "My king," he said. General Sayla followed, her silver armor catching the light as she knelt. Then the other military commanders, one by one, lowering themselves before the human who had just been elevated above them all. They were soldiers, trained to follow orders, and the queen had given the clearest order of her reign. The civilian nobles were slower to submit. Some knelt immediately, their minds already calculating how to benefit from this new reality. Others hesitated, their pride warring with their survival instincts. A few looked to Lord Vexen, hoping he would lead them in defiance. But Vexen was alone. Even his closest allies had abandoned, recognizing that to oppose the queen now would mean death. With visible disgust on his face, he finally bent his knee, though his eyes never left Daniel's face. The hatred in them was clear. This was not over. When all the nobles had knelt, a voice rang out from somewhere in the crowd. Just one word, shouted with unexpected force. "King." Another voice joined in. Then another. Then more, until the cry filled the throne room like a wave. "King. King. King." Daniel stood at the center of it all, overwhelmed by what was happening. An hour ago, he had been a prisoner facing execution. Now an alien empire was declaring him their future ruler. The chains had been removed from his wrists, and Lyrna had crossed the room to stand at his side. Her hand finding his Dark Queen Nithara watched with satisfaction. She had taken the greatest risk of her long reign, and so far it appeared to be paying off. But she knew better than anyone that the real challenges were still to come. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. News of what had happened spread across the empire within hours, carried by faster-than-light communications to every world under Valari control. The reactions were mixed. Some celebrated the news as a sign of new beginnings. Others protested in the streets, demanding that the queen reverse her decision. A few colonies threatened to break away entirely, but the queen's grip on power was too strong for any real rebellion to take hold. Her military remained loyal, and without their support, the protesters had no way to challenge her authority. Slowly, grudgingly, the empire began to accept the reality of a human prince. On Earth, the news arrived like a bolt from the sky. The human government had sent Daniel Carter to be an ambassador, hoping for nothing more than a trade agreement. Instead, they had gained something no one had ever imagined possible. A human would help rule the most powerful civilization in the quadrant. Lieutenant Commander Grace Murphy received the news in her quarters on Valara Prime. She had been confined there since the night of Daniel's arrest, uncertain of her fate. When the guards came to release her and tell her what had happened, she did not believe them at first. She found Daniel in the palace gardens, the same gardens where he had first realized his love for Lyrna. He was dressed in Valari royal robes now, deep blue with silver trim, and he looked so different from the soldier she had known for 15 years. But when he saw her, his smile was the same. "Grace," he said, "you look like you have seen a ghost." "I feel like I have," she replied. "Danny, what happened? How is any of this real?" He told her everything, from the moment the guards had dragged him from his bed to the queen's roar in the throne room. Grace listened in silence, shaking her head in disbelief. "You know this changes everything," she said when he finished. "Not just for you, for all of humanity. We are not outsiders anymore. We are part of the ruling family of an empire." "I know," Daniel said, "and I am afraid of what that means. I never wanted power. I just wanted to love Lorena. Well, it seems you got both." Grace smiled and placed her hand on his shoulder. "For what it is worth, I think you will be a good king. You have always had a gift for bringing people together. Maybe that is what the galaxy needs right now." The formal wedding ceremony took place 3 months later. It was the largest gathering of dignitaries in recorded history. Representatives from every species in the quadrant attended, curious to witness the union that had shocked the stars. The human delegation included the leader of Earth itself, who gave a speech about hope and the future of interstellar relations. Daniel and Lirina exchanged vows in the traditional Valari style, their hands bound together with ribbons of light. When the ceremony ended, the cheers that rose from the assembled crowd seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. But the most important moment came 3 months after that. In a private chamber of the Royal Medical Wing, Princess Mira was born on a morning of soft purple light. She was smaller than a typical Valari infant, with her father's warm brown eyes and her mother's iridescent scales. The doctors said she was healthy, a perfect blend of two species that should never have been able to combine. Daniel held his daughter for the first time and felt tears running down his face. This tiny being, this impossible miracle, represented everything he had fought for. Not power or glory, but love. Simple, stubborn, unconquerable love. "She is beautiful," Lorena said, exhausted but radiant in her hospital bed. "Our beautiful girl. She is going to change the galaxy," Daniel replied. "I can feel it." Queen Nathara visited them that evening. She stood at the foot of the bed, looking at her granddaughter with an expression Daniel had never seen on her face before. It took him a moment to recognize it as wonder. "I have ruled this empire for 600 years, she said quietly. "I have seen wars and plagues and revolutions. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But this child, she is something entirely new." She reached out and touched Myra's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around hers. "When I chose to accept you," the queen continued, looking at Daniel, "I did so because I believed it was necessary for our survival. Our empire was dying, and we needed new blood, new ideas, new hope. But now, looking at this child, I realize I was thinking too small." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked. "I was thinking about saving the Valari. But this child will not just save us. She will unite the galaxy. She will be the bridge between worlds, the proof that we are all more alike than we are different. In her veins flows the future of every species." Nathara straightened and looked at Daniel with something approaching respect. "I chose well, human. You have given us a gift that cannot be measured." In the years that followed, the queen's words proved true. Princess Myra grew into a child of remarkable intelligence and empathy. She had her father's curiosity and her mother's strength. She could speak 5 languages by the time she was 6 and had mastered Valari politics by the time she was 12, and everywhere she went, she brought peace. The enemies of the Valari Empire, species who had feared and hated them for millennia, began to see things differently. This hybrid princess, this impossible blend of human and alien, represented something they had never believed possible. She was proof that old hatreds could be overcome, that new alliances could be formed, that the galaxy could become something better than it had ever been. When Myra was 18 years old, she stood before the Galactic Council, an assembly of delegates from every known civilization. Her grandmother had died 2 years before, and her mother now sat on the Valari throne. But it was Mira who had been asked to speak, because it was Mira who represented the future. "My existence was called impossible," she said, her voice carrying across the great chamber. "But I am here. My parents were told their love was forbidden, but they loved anyway. My people were told that purity was strength, but they have learned that diversity is stronger." She looked out at the assembled delegates, beings of every shape and color and kind. "We stand at a crossroads. We can continue to fear each other, to fight each other, to see our differences as weaknesses. Or we can do what my parents did. We can choose love over fear, hope over hatred, the future over the past." Grace Murphy stood in the human delegation, tears in her eyes, remembering a young commander who had gone to an alien world and fallen in love with a princess. She had thought then that he was being foolish. She had thought that his love would destroy everything. She had never been so happy to be wrong. On the throne of the Valari Empire, Daniel Carter sat beside his wife, watching their daughter address the galaxy. He thought of Earth, of the small blue world that had sent him to the stars. They had worried that humanity was too young, too weak to matter in a galaxy of ancient powers. They had been wrong. Humanity had not conquered the stars with weapons or technology. They had done something far more powerful. They had loved without reservation, hoped without limit, and changed the course of history simply by being themselves. As Mira finished her speech and the chamber erupted in applause, Daniel smiled. This was only the beginning.